For the hour, it's no new revelation that today's budget speech by Finance Minister Tito Mboweni comes at a time when the country is really going through a deep economic crisis. For years now, the country has been battling the same challenges of unemployment and inequality. Promises have been made to reduce poverty, but statistics show that the situation is just getting worse. Institutions such as the IMF, the World Bank and rating agencies have suggested that structural changes need to be implemented for the country to see an effective turnaround in the economy. We look at the National Development Plan, which is the country's blueprint document that was meant to put the country on an economic growth path. It's not working, by the presidency's own admission last year. In studio with us, we've got Professor Jannie Rossouw. He's the interim head at Wits Business School. Good to have you.
Good morning, and good morning to the viewers.
Thanks so much for joining us and trying to help us through what is, we always say this, and I opened the show saying that we always call this the most important budget ever, because we've been saying that for the last couple of years. And I think we keep saying that is because the situation never seems to improve. What are your sort of views on this year's budget?
Well, in short, South Africa has not had economic growth. We've had about 0.5 percentage point of economic growth. As a result of that, the tax income of the government has not grown, whereas government expenditure continued to grow as if the economy has had growth of about 2.5% per annum. As a result, the government is squeezed for income. That's the shortest possible summary I can give.
Yeah, and I think a hard-hitting summary at that. I mean, if we had to look at the midterm budget speeches from last year, there've obviously been a couple of commitments that have been met, but a lot that haven't. So what can we look at from that midterm budget bringing into today?
Well, in the MTBPS in October last year, the minister has promised expenditure cuts, and we need to see those expenditure cuts over the next 3 years going forward. Because the revenue is not there, the expenditure must be cut. You must remember that a government is very much like a household. You have income and you have expenditure, and you get some balance between the two to be sustainable. And if your income drops, you have to cut your expenditure, or else you will run into financial hardship. The South African government's income dropped, and the government has not adjusted expenditure accordingly, and hence we have fiscal hardship at the moment. I've warned about the fiscal cliff for many years, and we are now at the fiscal cliff. We have no option but to make hard choices.
Yeah, talk to me about this fiscal cliff and people that are watching at home. They may not quite understand what you're referring to.
Well, the argument I've made is that 10 years ago, civil service remuneration plus social grant payments plus interest on government debt accounted for 55% of government revenue. At the moment, those free expenditure items account for 73% of government revenue. Civil service remuneration alone accounts for 46% of government revenue. It's clearly unsustainable.
Yeah. I mean, people are looking for reality right now, because the reality that a lot of South Africans are living in is not a nice reality, and it's not. There's no hope. There's not a feeling that things are going to change. I mean, what can the finance minister do? What can he realistically do to help South Africans?
Well, at this point in time, the finance minister will have to explain to us, on the one hand, how revenue will be increased because we need more revenue. For that, we will probably see an increase in the VAT rate from 15 to 16%.
Do you believe that? Is that the one thing that we can look to?
Well, that is where money can be raised. We can probably see a further personal income tax bracket of 50%, perhaps above income of 2.5 or 3 million rands a year, to balance, of course, the VAT increase. So that will give more revenue. At the same time, as I've said, we need to see where government will cut expenditure.
Yeah.
Then, of course, related to this, we have the strange notion that we can embark on new projects and that the money will come from somewhere. Earlier this week, Mr. Ramaphosa had written his weekly newsletter on the national health insurance that South Africa will have by 2026. Now, we frankly don't have money for that. So the government should also stop dreaming, because these strange dreams really bring us nowhere. Then there's this idea of a state bank. We need to see what will be announced around that. And then the strangest of them all is a sovereign wealth fund. A sovereign wealth fund is something that the country typically announces and a country will typically introduce when you have surplus income and when your government debt is at a very low level. We don't have any one of those two conditions at the moment. So the government should stop dreaming, should stop making these strange announcements, and should also introduce some reality in the expectations created amongst the public.
Let's dwell on the state bank for a second, because this isn't a new idea. It's something that has been spoken about, but the president seemed adamant that this was going to get off the ground. Talk to us about the state bank.
Well, in the sense of a state bank, the government already has two banks. It has the land bank, which was not very well managed, and it has the post bank, again not very well managed. So it's not clear to me whether the post bank will be converted into a true state bank or whether a third bank will be established. Once a third bank is then established or the post bank converted into a state bank, we need to understand what the objectives of the bank will be, what the capitalization of the bank will be, and what the regulatory control structure around this bank will be. But in short, we need to understand the objectives of a state bank if it's introduced.
Yeah. What are the objectives of a state bank?
Well, it seems to me that the objectives of a state bank is somewhere in the space of helping what we call unbanked people, people who do not currently have access to banking services. People with access to banking services are already well served because South Africa has a very well developed banking system as it is. But the minister must give us some guidance on the objectives of a state bank if an announcement with more detail is made in today's budget speech, as is expected.
What about SOEs? Because that's one that people are looking to. I mean, we can talk about Eskom and the financing thereof. I mean, we're seeing shortfalls at Eskom. We're seeing loans coming out of all different places, and then there's SAA. I mean, the list is endless of SOEs. That is a conversation in itself. What do you think is going to be spoken about there?
What's going to be spoken about and what should happen, these are two completely different things. Let me start with SAA. I've said 5 years ago the government should simply give it away. By now there's nothing left to give away. The government should simply close it. The same with SA Express and the same with Denel. These are not mission-critical state-owned enterprises. Just get rid of them because they cost taxpayers a lot of money. Eskom is of course mission-critical, and in terms of Eskom it's necessary for the government to increase transparency considerably. Eskom is a monopoly in the government space, funded by taxpayers. So for one, there's no reason why Eskom's contracts can't all be published on its website. Why should Eskom enter into confidential contracts, make a loss, and then get funded by taxpayers? So we are not even privy to see which contracts we are funding, but Eskom keeps on demanding more of our tax money. So there's something fundamentally wrong at Eskom. They're hiding something from the public. It's time that transparency at Eskom is restored so that we know what's going on. The rest of the SOEs in difficulty, just get rid of them. There's no reason for them to exist.
Wow. It's quite a harsh view that you're taking here.
Yes, but it's time for tough decisions. If you're in trouble, you take tough decisions. You can't continue doing what you're doing and expect a different outcome when you're in trouble, because that conduct brought you into trouble in the first instance. So this is a time for tough decisions, and we're going to see today whether the government has appetite for tough decisions or not.
Yeah. We talk tough decisions, and the tough decisions is the reality. I mean, last year we saw the finance minister, he never minced his words when he spoke to the fact that the public sector wage bill is too high and it needs to be reduced. So this is going to be an interesting thing that we see coming out of the budget here as to action and steps that are going to be taken to reduce this public sector wage bill. What do you think about this?
Well, we have no option to do this. The public sector wage bill has grown at 3.5 percentage points above the rate of inflation over the past decade, while the economy has grown at 0.5 percentage point. So the public sector wage bill as a percentage of total expenditure has gone completely out of hand. We simply cannot afford South Africa's public sector at this point in time. So we need to address this problem. Please remember that other than the annual adjustment that public servants get, there's also what is called notch increases, which amount to about 1 percentage point in addition to the annual increase. So even if we say no annual increases for civil servants, there will still be notch increases and promotions in the civil service. And that in itself will increase the wage bill by 1.5%, even if there are no general adjustments. So we really need to get to grips with this. Our civil service remuneration bill is the second highest in the world when compared to revenue or expenditure after Namibia.
Yeah. I want to just, on that note as well, we saw something coming out last night. We're still waiting for a bit more detail. I know that you mentioned it before the interview, so we're waiting for something else to come through on this one, where last night it came through that the government is reportedly attempting to pull out of a 3-year public sector wage agreement, according to which workers were guaranteed salary increases at CPI plus 2%, and the unions really are up in arms against this. I mean, we saw the PSA rejecting government's last-minute request to review the public service wage agreement. This is a big story. I mean, this is something that I think is going to develop a lot as the morning progresses. But what do you make of this? I mean, the reality is government can't actually afford it at this stage.
Well, clearly the Treasury has now said to the trade unions, we cannot afford the wage agreement agreed to in 2018. Because the wage agreement in 2018 was based on an assumption that South Africa's economy will grow somewhere between 2.5% and 3% this year. The economy will probably grow at 0.5% this year. So the wage agreement in 2018 was entered into on a wrong growth assumption. So with the growth assumption we have now, we just cannot afford what was agreed to in 2018. So clearly this will be a showdown between government and trade unions. This will probably result in a trade union strike. We don't know how long such a strike will continue, and as a result of that, it is a question of who's going to blink first if government embarks on this trajectory.
Yeah. One of the other things I just need to look at quickly is the issue of e-tolls. I mean, I know that last year the finance minister, he went and said that e-tolls are here to stay. But yesterday we saw the Gauteng Premier David Makura and National Minister of Transport saying that, they were open to suggestions of not having e-tolls. I mean, this is another massive sticking point that we've got here.
Yeah, but in short, this is part of South Africa's overall problem, why we don't get economic growth. Depending on whom you speak to in the government, you get different answers to the same question.
Yeah.
This leads to policy uncertainty, and with policy uncertainty, we will not see investment in our economy. And if we don't see investment, we will not see the economic growth that we need. So we need to get a coherent government policy on issues like e-toll, SOEs, etc., to move our economy forward.
Yeah. All right, so that's the preview for the budget coming up. It'll be announced this afternoon, so we wait to see what comes out of this. The National Development Plan, I mean, what's happening there? That's another thing that we just haven't heard about. We thought we'd get a revised one in September, but nothing's happened since then.
Well, at this point in time, I would not exactly say that the government has any plans. So let alone a national development plan, I don't see coherent planning in the conduct of the government. Until such time as we see coherent planning over a broad spectrum, if we don't see that, we cannot even talk about the national development plan.
Jannie, thank you very much for talking to us. Professor Jannie Rossouw is the interim head of the Wits Business School, talking to us about some expectations ahead of Budget 2020. Well, Sakina,